morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and as always told out of Voice of Radio. So today, we need to take a look at the ADP problem. Now, this has had a lot of discussion in the Pokemon TCG community over the past couple of months, and I'm just going to say, I was kind of ahead of the curve on this one. I was talking about what a problem this was 6 months ago, and I wanted to join in the conversation, I really did, but I made my points in that video. I didn't have anything to add. So I thought today we would change the tact a little bit, and we talk about ways to beat it. Let's be clear, it is running roughshod through the Players' Cup qualifying events right now. It is an absolute beast. However, it can be stopped. We just don't have one great catch-all way to stop it, or else we would be stopping it. Of course, a quick reminder about ADP. What we've got here is the ridiculous GX attack altered creation that for one metal energy says for the rest of the game your attacks do an extra 30 damage. That's all of your Pokemon. But if you add a water energy as well, you also take an extra prize every time you take a KO. And that in and of itself is absolutely crushing, especially to single prize decks, where you're not winning the prize trade anymore, they're getting an extra prize every time they take a KO. It's a little bit dumb. But they've also got the attack Ultimate Ray. You add one more energy from the GX attack, you do 150 damage, and you get to search your deck for free basic energy and attach them to your Pokemon in any way you like. And this gets played primarily with Zacian. And generally speaking, you either go first and you need 2 energy for the turn 2 GX attack, you're good. Or you go second and there's some combination of Turbo Patch or Metal Saucer and Energy Switch. Remember, you can neither Turbo Patch nor Metal Saucer onto ADP because it's a GX and it's not metal. And then you end up getting the turn 1 GX attack, and it's pretty crushing. So how can we beat it? Well, generally speaking, when we look at things like this, we go, right, let's hit it for weakness. Let them use their GX attack. We'll just come in with a fairy Pokemon that can do 140 damage and get a one-hit KO for 3 prizes, and then we're kind of off and rolling. Sure, they're taking an extra prize every time they take a KO, but we're starting 3 prizes ahead. We should be fine. But it's not that simple. Because with the introduction of the Sword and Shield block, that's where we are at the moment, there are no new fairy Pokemon. Fairy Pokemon don't exist. Yeah. There's no new ones anyway. I mean, I would genuinely have loved to use Granbull here. Granbull does 160 for a single energy if you've got no cards in hand. I'd be playing it with the Duskull from Cosmic Eclipse that essentially just lets you discard 3 cards from your hand. And yes, it would be a pretty blunt way to go about it, but you'd be getting a nice easy one-hit KO, and that sounds alright to me. But that's rotated. People play Gardevoir and Sylveon, but Gardevoir and Sylveon's not good right now. Gardevoir and Sylveon is weak to Zacian. So even if you did take 3 prizes off them, Zacian would just take 3 prizes off you, and then you wouldn't one-hit KO, and then they'd KO another one and win. Gardevoir and Sylveon's not a good deck right now, and even if it was, it wouldn't beat Zacian ADP. So that's out. I mean, personally, I'm a big fan of Alolan Ninetales, the one from Cosmic Eclipse. Great card. For 0 energy, you do 10 damage for each Pokemon tool in your discard. But even then, you need 14 tools in the discard to get a one-hit KO, assuming they don't play a big charm. And it's just too awkward. And then you go back to the problem of it's not actually a good deck right now. I mean, you put that up against something like a Center Scorch, and it's just not working. So, yeah. We just don't have one, and if I've missed one, please let me know. As far as I'm aware, there is no good fairy Pokemon right now that you can actually use to counter. So where do we go instead? Energy Denial. This seems to be most people's number one goal of taking down ADP, is using Crushing Hammer, using Energy Denial to make sure they don't have the energy they need to do the attacks they want to do. And on the one hand, yes, Crushing Hammer is good and it will get the energy off, but there's problems with this. Firstly, Crushing Hammer itself is a flippy card. You flip tails, you don't get the energy. And secondly, they're accelerating energy. they can get the energy in one turn. They can just go Turbo Patch or Metal Saucer onto Zacian, Energy Switch, Energy GX attack. And then maybe you get rid of all their energy, and if you do, that's brilliant. But as soon as they get one attack off with ADP, they've then got energy for the rest of the game. And they're almost certainly playing 4 Metal Patch, and they might be playing Turbo Patch or Metal Saucer. And it works, don't get me wrong, it can work. But if this was a foolproof plan, it would be working better than it currently is. Now, you can use Team Yell Grunt as well. That puts an energy from the defending Pokemon into your opponent's hand. And I am a big fan of the Clefable, the one that came around fairly recently, the one from Darkness Ablaze. But the problem with this is it's a stage 1. Now, when you evolve up into it, it's got the same effect as Team Yell Grunt. You put an energy from your opponent's active on top of their deck. Okay, it's not quite the same. It's top of their deck, not their hand, but it's close enough. And then you would use Scoop Up Net to essentially reuse this over and over again. But the reality is, it's just not consistent enough. And, I mean, I've seen people try Dragapult V Max with Clefable. You do a bit of damage, and you spread damage around while you attack, and you get rid of their energy. And it's a deck I'm kind of fond of. It's quite fun, but it's not proven itself to actually be a top-tier deck. Essentially, your best bet is Crushing Hammer. And if you don't flip heads on Crushing Hammer, or your opponent has an option when you do, you still end up losing. Now, one of my personal favourite options, this is what I don't know if it's going to stick, but it's what I'm currently playing around with in my Excadrill deck. It's Heracross. Now, Heracross doesn't always work. Heracross for a single energy says that if one of your opponent's Pokemon used a GX attack during their last turn, your opponent shuffles their active Pokemon and all cards attached to it into their deck. So essentially what you do here is you punish your opponent for having a good start. They get that turn 1 Altered Creation GX, and then you put ADP and all the energy attached to it into their deck. Their bench is going to usually consist of Zacian, maybe a Dedenne, maybe a Morile. Generally speaking, that's about what we see turn 1. And they might have energy on, but there's a decent chance they don't have energy on. And if they don't have energy on, then you're in a great position because your opponent is essentially going to have to take a turn or 2 off. They're going to have to try and Turbo Patch / Metal Saucer onto a Zacian, but remember, if they put the Zacian into the active, they're not going to be able to Metal Saucer, and that can be very awkward. And this is not a perfect solution by any stretch of the imagination, but it can work. If your opponent gets a couple Metal Saucer off turn 1, that's awkward, because you get rid of the ADP, but then they just promote Zacian, attach an energy, and take a KO. So you've then basically got a one-hit KO a Zacian, because they've just got a KO, they've taken an extra prize, and because they've got free energy on Zacian, they're now in a position to start building energy onto their remaining Pokemon. Or their other Pokemon, their backup attackers, etc. And Morile becomes a real problem here, because they've essentially got a 2 energy attack. And against stuff like Excadrill, that is more than good enough. They're doing more than enough damage. And that, again, it's an awkward thing because you're trying to run them out of energy, but this gives them a good option where it's harder to run them out of energy. So then you've basically got a one-hit KO Morile as well, but at that stage, they're very close to winning the game. Hopefully they're out of Pokemon, but it's not guaranteed. Of course, one of the best ways to go about beating it is just get one-hit KOs with smaller Pokemon. But that's not exactly something we can do very often. I mean, Blacephalon is the perfect example of this. And when Blacephalon works, it's phenomenal. But Blacephalon is a famously awkward deck to get turn after turn, and you also just lost Fiery Flint. Got rotated out, big loss. Essentially, Blacephalon, you need to get free energy on there. That's Welder and 1 extra energy. And then you discard as much fire energy from your hand as you like, doing 50 damage for each one discarded. So you discard essentially 6 fire energy, although if they've got a big charm, 6 won't actually be enough. And then you get a one-hit KO on ADP, and from there, taking out Zacian, etc. is going to be super easy because they're weak. But taking out the ADP is going to be a huge problem. And you're on that clock. where you've essentially got to do it now. Because they use a GX attack and you've got to KO ADP. If you don't, they take 2 prizes off Blacephalon, you take 3 prizes off ADP, they take 2 prizes off Blacephalon, you take 2 prizes, they win the game. So you've got to KO the ADP before they start taking any prizes. If they take the first prize against a single prize deck and it's the first 2 prizes, you've got to get 2 free prize Pokemon KOs in a row in order to win that prize race. And if your opponent drops 2 ADP in this situation, so that you actually legitimately can do it, you kind of deserve to win that game. The other one that people talk about quite a bit is Spiritomb, and I love Spiritomb. Anyone watching this channel will know that I am a huge, huge fan of Spiritomb. Spiritomb's awesome. Spiritomb, for a single energy, does 10 damage base plus 30 more for each damage counter on it. And the ability says that once during a turn, you may put 1 damage counter on Spiritomb. So you use Cape of Toughness to put your HP up to 110. And you use all things like Switch and Scoop Up Net to get in and out the active over and over again, with Spikemuth Stadium down, or just Spikemuth as it was actually called. And then every time you switch to the bench, don't use Scoop Up Net on a Spiritomb, obviously. Use that on the thing you put active, and then put Spiritomb in the active, and then switch, etc. Then you put 2 damage counters on. And then you would use Jinx, which can move damage from one Pokemon to another, which could be a second Spiritomb, or a Pokemon you switch to the bench to get Spiritomb back in, etc. And it's doable. But the problem is, you need 9 damage counters on. 9 damage counters on Spiritomb, you hit 280. Again, if they've got a big charm on, you're going to need 10 damage counters. And the problem is, you're on a gigantic clock here. Or actually a very small clock. Because your opponent is going to start taking 2 prize knockouts. So you need to essentially, just like we said with Blacephalon, you need to get that big 1-hit KO on an ADP the turn after they GX. Or if you're lucky, you go second, they essentially have an ADP in the active, and you can potentially 2-hit KO, and then 1-hit KO Zacian, 1-hit KO Zacian, or Moral, whatever's out. And then you can actually win the game that way. And that is possible, that will work. But you're essentially saying that you've got to have a monster start. You having a Spiritomb with 9 damage counters on is a heck of a lot more awkward than your opponent getting 2 energy on an ADP. And that's a problem. Now, there are some specific decks which can handle it quite well. Obstagoon is obviously one that's kind of fun here. Obstagoon's got the attack that says, for 2 energy, during your opponent's next turn, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from basic Pokemon. And a lot of ADP decks don't actually play any evolving Pokemon, they just play basics. But even this is not a perfect solution, because your opponent is going to be using stuff like Boss's Orders to try and get your bench Pokemon, and try and take KOs. And maybe they do, maybe they don't. But you're a 2 energy attacker that probably doesn't play any energy acceleration, and you're a stage 2. So your challenge, essentially, is set up an Obstagoon with 2 energy on, never, ever bench more than 2 extra Pokemon. One of them can be a 2 prizer, the other one can't. Because if you ever bench more than 2 other bench Pokemon, your opponent is just going to gust and take a KO. And if they do that 3 times, they will win. And then from there, if you can obstruct every turn, you probably will win. But that is awful awkward, ladies and gentlemen. That's like proper job awkward. And that's the problem with all of these counters. Galarian Obstagoon works beautifully if you can actually get rolling with Obstruct. But if you can't, it doesn't. And you are the slower, more awkward deck here. Make no mistake about it. You are very much the slower, more awkward deck. And then there are some which are just generally pretty good. I mean, Eternatus and Centiskorch are 2 of the big decks right now, and Eternatus and Centiskorch can hang. They're not quite on the same level, but they absolutely can hang. I mean, Eternatus is in a good position because it's got 340 HP, so it's just not getting 1-hit KO'd. And you can do 270 damage if you've got a full bench of 8 Pokemon, because Eternus just lets you have 8 Pokemon on the bench. And I know 270 isn't enough, but you will be playing Galarian Zigzagoon here, so that will allow you to do the extra 10 and get the one-hit KO. The issue here is that this deck sets up with stuff like Crobat. And if you set up with Crobat, ADP is just going to boss his orders to Crobat, and if they do that twice, they'll take 6 prizes and win the game. And it's not always easy, and you can outspeed them sometimes, and you can, if you go first and get a really big turn 2, get the KO on ADP before they've gotten any energy acceleration, and then they can't one-hit KO you. It can work, but you are relying on having a much faster start than your opponent. Similarly, Center Scorch. Center Scorch can do it. You've got a very similar thing going on here. We've got 320 HP, so you're out of one-hit KO range. And for 2 energy minimum, you do 40 damage plus 40 for each fire energy on Center Scorch. And you're hitting weakness on Zacian, etc., so you're good. But the problem here is that you've got to actually get set up. And you've got to get enough energy on Center Scorch to get the one-hit KOs, which means you're probably not KOing the ADP first. You're probably going to try and have to get a KO on the Zacian. Except remember, your gusting options are going to be much lower because you're going to have to use Welder instead of Boss's Orders a lot of games. It's a winnable matchup, but there's a reason Center Scorch isn't the best deck in the format. And then finally, Pikachu and Zekrom. Now, Pikachu and Zekrom isn't quite the powerhouse it was pre-rotation, but it's still a very good deck. And you've got your GX attack here that lets you do 200 to the active and 170 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So hopefully here you're actually taking potentially 4 prizes in one go, and that is going to lead you to victory, especially when you combine it with Crushing Hammers to essentially slow your opponent down. But one of the issues is, even with your resistance, you've got an effective HP of 260, and Zacian is doing 260 after a GX attack, so you're going to need something like a Big Charm in order to actually take a hit from a Zacian, and hopefully you can see where we're going here. We've got a bunch of options, but none of the options are particularly good. There are certainly some decks that can beat it, but even the ones that can beat it don't beat it all of the time. You can whack 4 hammers in a deck and cross your fingers, and sometimes that's going to work. But is it going to win often enough? The answer is, you'll have to test it and see, won't you? I'm sorry I can't give you a perfect here's how you beat ADP every time answer, but honestly, if that existed, well, we'd all be playing it and ADP would be gone. Boo! But hopefully I've given you some nice options here. But now I'd like to hear from you guys. Do you struggle against ADP? Do you have a deck that beats it every time? Tell me what you think about ADP and your best way to beat it. Go nuts in the comment section, but be nice! And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.